Okay.
Julie, whatever you're knitting looks beautiful. Oh, it's lovely.
She's working on a stained glass blanket.
Beautiful.
It is beautiful.
Thanks. I couldn't figure out how to unmute myself with Pam pinned.
Oh yeah, I pinned so we can keep it on. Keep all the attention on me, which is what I love. So we're gonna start. This is kind of a basics in how in blocking and how to block both your knit and your crochet projects. We get asked two questions most often. One, do I have to make a gauge swatch? And two, do I have to block this when I'm done? And the answer to the first one is always yes, depending on who you ask. Yes, you should always make a gauge swatch. Two, do you always have to block it? And the answer is no, you don't always have to block it. But the reasons why you would block something are for a few reasons. Blocking, which means to get your knitted or your crocheted fabric wet in some way, laid out into a shape, either with pins or just hand smoothing, and letting it dry is essentially all blocking is. The reasons why you might want to block something is if one, if you need to smooth out your stitches or smooth out your tension. So for example, if you were knitting something that had cables and it had a definite right side and wrong side, the cables would have probably a different tension than if you were just purling back on the wrong side. So in order to kind of smooth all that out and make it lay flatter and smooth out your stitches, blocking will help do that by getting it completely saturated, either smoothing it out with your fingers or using pins to hold it into a shape, will help release that tension that's pulling to one side or the other. It just helps the yarn relax a little bit, and then you can let it dry in the position you want it to be in, not the position you've forced it into by either making cable stitches or whatever your design is. Another reason why you might want to block is if you are doing something with lace work. So you have a lot of yarn overs, you've got a design that you really want to open up. Blocking is how you make that happen. And I have an example that I'll show you here of something that has a little bit of lace work in it. If you've got something that you've knit or crocheted and you might have added some edging, either garter stitch edging or ribbing to keep it from curling, and yet it still curls a little bit. Blocking can help. It can't completely stop a curl if you don't have, if you're doing everything in stockinette and you've put no border on it, it's going to curl. That's, you know, that's just the rule of stockinette stitch. But if you've maybe put maybe not quite enough border on it, or on your side edges, if you've put a little bit of garter stitch and it's still rolling up a little, blocking can help smooth that out a little bit. Another reason why you would want to block is, and I like the example, I've started buying, and my husband buys those no iron shirts that you can just throw in the wash and dryer and shake them out and they look great. They do look pretty good. But if you were to run a little bit of an iron over it, they would look even better. It gets all of the wrinkles out, but it doesn't really give it that smooth, polished look. And blocking can help do that. It can give it that, give your stitches a nice smooth look, particularly if you're a knitter like I am, that I shove it into a bag at the end of every day. I schlep it around. Sometimes my dog carries it. Sometimes it gets caught up on something else. It's got a little snag. You can use blocking to just kind of get rid of all of that, those little imperfections, and just help smooth out all of your stitches. Reasons why you could avoid blocking. If you like the way it looks. If you finish knitting or crocheting something and it looks fine and it fits fine and it doesn't really need to be washed, you're good to go. You don't really have to block it. A hat, you don't really need to block a hat unless you've done, like it's got all sorts of intricate cable work and you feel like it would just look better smoothed out. You can do that. Gloves, not necessarily needed. Blankets, you know, if it's just going to get squished up on your couch anyway, is it really worth blocking? Unless it has, you know, a lot of like the other reasons, lace work or stitches that need to be smoothed out, you don't really have to block it. If you've made something out of an all acrylic yarn, you might get a little help from blocking. If it has some lace work, you might be able to get that lace work to open up, but acrylic yarn doesn't have that springy memory that wool does. You're not going to get a lot of benefit from it. So if you've done it with an all acrylic, you washing it, totally fine, but blocking it and smoothing it out into another shape probably isn't going to get you very far because it's just going to retain its current shape. Let's see what else I got. So there's lots of ways to block. The most common way, which is what I'm going to demonstrate, is called wet blocking, where you are completely submerging fabric in water, really letting the fabrics get completely saturated, and then using pins or wires or other things to help lay it out. Another way to block is to use misting. This is probably the next most common way. This is if it's a small item, if you feel like maybe it doesn't need a ton of blocking, but let's say you've done, well, let's say a sweater in pieces and it's ready to be seamed together, and you want to make sure, you know, you've got your front and your back, and you want to make sure those pieces are the same size. You could lay it out, pin it to the size you need, so that if this is supposed to be 12 inches from here to here, use your measuring tape, pin everything to 12 inches, give it a spritz, and then let it dry. And you know it's going to be in the right shape. If it doesn't really need a lot of other shaping, you could use some misting that way. If it's something really small, and maybe just a part of it needs to be blocked. For example, somebody made the other day a headband, and it had a little cable pattern in it. So she didn't want it to stretch out. She was afraid it might stretch out because of the yarn that she used, but she really wanted the cable to lay smoother. Just laid it out, spritzed that a little bit, and just with fingers kind of shaped the cable a little bit. It looked great. It was fine then. Let's see. If you're concerned about something stretching, some yarns will stretch more than others. We've got a sweater in the shop here. We call it the Big Green Monster. It's done out of Andorra, which has an alpaca blend, and it's a loose knit. And when Audrey finished it and she submerged it in water and kind of picked it up out of the water to roll it in a towel, it was clear that it had just, the fabric had really relaxed, and it was huge. So instead of blocking it, you think about blocking, maybe opening things up, making things a little bigger. This one, we had to really smush it together. That would have been a sweater in hindsight, had we done a little test, which is a good reason. We could have just laid it out, spritzed it with some water, smoothed it out, and it would have been fine. Now, that's not to say that eventually you're going to need to wash the sweater. If it's a hand wash, then you're definitely going to have to kind of smush it together. But if it just needs a little spot clean, you don't have to do all of that. Let's see. If you've got something that is silk, misting can be a good way to do that. You don't want to get it overly wet because it will stretch. It can't, especially if it's just an all silk or a majority silk. The other option that people often resort to is steaming, doing steam blocking. Definitely don't want to use steam blocking on silk or synthetic fibers. They can burn or melt. I've seen that happen. But steam blocking is a kind of a quick way to steam something, particularly something small. You can lay it out on your ironing board. You can cover it with a, let me think of an idea. Especially something that curls. Like I've got a sweater, it's a machine knit, but there's not quite enough, it's a cardigan, not quite enough garter stitch around the edging to keep it from kind of folding up. So when I'm ready to wear it, I lay it out, put a wet linen towel over the top of it, and then just hover a steam iron. You don't actually press, you just use the steam and hover over it. And it just relaxes that enough that it keeps it laid out. And usually I can get 2 or 3 wearings out of it before it starts to want to roll back up again just from the wearing. But again, you don't want to actually press it. You can end up damaging your fabrics that way. It's more of a hover technique with your steam iron, or you can use an actual steamer like you do with regular clothes. You can steam things that way as well. Okay, wet blocking. Do anybody have any questions? I'm happy to answer questions anytime along the way. Just don't hesitate to holler out if you do.
Pam, I've got one.
Yeah.
What about cottons?
Cottons, you can absolutely block cottons. Cotton does not have the springy memory that wool does.
Okay.
So one of the things you need to be careful of with cotton is that you don't overstretch it, because while wool will want to spring back a little, cotton won't. It doesn't have the memory that wool does, and it can eventually be stretched out, in which case you could toss it in the dryer a little bit if you need to, but you certainly can get some benefit. I would probably try the misting, especially if you're doing something with a little lace work in it or has some detail. Are you talking about the blanket you're doing?
I just was asking in general.
Okay, so like for a cotton baby blanket, I would definitely want to wash it before I gave it to him. And I think it just gives it it'll still smooth out those stitches a little bit, especially like if you've gotten a loose stitch here or there, you just need to kind of readjust things. It's much easier after it's been wet. But you could maybe just pin it out, spray it a little bit. You can, put a little drop of lavender oil or something in there if you want to give it a nice scent. We also sell here, the product I'm going to use for cleaning is called Soak. They also make a mist called Flatter that it has the scents in it too. And it's just a nice way to kind of refresh fabrics, especially if you're giving something as a gift, something like that. Good question. I'm going to show you how to wet block something, which is probably the most used way, and you can get the most out of blocking by wet blocking. Okay, so you need some tools for blocking, for wet blocking, I should say. And even for misting and steam ironing, you might need some pins, you would need a surface to do it on. I know what Beth was saying earlier. Oh, somebody said something in the chat. Hold on before I go too far. Superwash wool. Absolutely, you can block superwash wool. Depending on what it is, I would follow the same rules. If excuse me, if you like the way it looks, if it already fits fine, I don't know that you necessarily need to block it. If it's the item that I'm going to block today is done out of superwash, and it definitely needs a little help. I'm going to show you a before and after so you can see. Tools you need. Beth was mentioning earlier about blocking mats. There's lots of things you can use for blocking mats. Until I got these little foam mats, I used, and I still have, and I use it for bigger items. It's a folding cardboard cutting board that my mom had for years and years and years. It's yellow, it folds up like an accordion. I like that because you can stick pins into it and it's got grid lines. So if you want to, I'm going to show you something with blocking wires in a minute where you might want to have a straight edge. The straight edge is already drawn on there for you. So that's one option. I know people who use large pieces of cardboard for just that reason. You can make your own straight edge on it. You can either mark it or you can put tape on it to make your own straight edge. If you're doing...
I'm sorry, what did you say it was called?
What's that?
What did you say it was called?
The cutting board.
Yeah.
It's like an accordion shape cardboard cutting board. I think Singer made it. I can picture the word printed on it. I know I've still seen them at Joann's.
I think I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. And it, you can throw it up on your table. It's like it becomes table size, but you don't have to unfold all of it. So, which is nice. So I would use that on a bed or, something where I could lay it out flat. You could also just, if you had a big piece of cardboard, you could do that. That's nice because the pins will stick into the cardboard. People will also just block on like a thick blanket with a towel or something that the pins will stick to. I know people who have an extra room in their house with a clean carpet, and that's where they block. So now they've invented these fun things, and I think they're the best. So I know Beth had mentioned you can buy these from several knitting and crochet and fiber manufacturers make them with grid lines printed on them. And I think you get 6 or 9 of them in a package for maybe $30, $35. Or you can buy, I think the last time I ordered them from Amazon, I think I got 30 of them for about $24. They're the 12 by 12 foam play tiles. If you search, sometimes dollar stores will have them too. Five Below will sometimes have these. Sometimes they'll have them in the 3 by 3 size, which is nice too. You can also use a yoga mat. I have 3 yoga mats because I was always going to do yoga, and I've never done yoga, but I have 3 yoga mats. They're excellent for blocking shawls on, because you can, especially if you've got something really long, because you can line them up and then roll it away, and it doesn't take up a ton of space when you're done. So that's another option because they stick really well. I like these. They fit underneath the bed when I'm done. I can configure them into any size that I need. And I'll show you an example of the shawl, how we did it with the blocking mats and able to make the size that we needed. So you need something to block on. So I've given you a couple examples of that. Then you need pins. There's a couple different kinds of pins. Whatever pin you use, you want to make sure that it is stainless steel and rust proof. The last thing you need is to stick any old pin in there and then it's sitting in something soaking wet for a while and you've got rust stains on your knitting. So we sell these. You can also get these at a variety of big box stores, or you may already have them if you're a sewer. T-pins. I like them because they're a little thicker. They don't bend. It's not like a sewing straight pin. I'm going to switch it to the camera.
Pam, can I just interject for one thing?
Yes.
If you get the T-pins, like if you go to a place like Joann's,
Yeah.
Be very careful that you do look for the ones that say no rust, because they sell just regular T-pins and it's very easy just to think they're one and the same.
Yes.
So better to buy them from the knit store or be very, very cautious about getting the correct ones.
Correct. And the ones that I've seen that I like either say, if they don't say rust proof, they say for blocking or something like that. They're not made just for sewing. They're made to be used with something wet. So I totally agree. So the ones that we sell here are by Knitter's Pride. And you get 50 in a pack, and they look like this. It's a nice thick pin. It doesn't hurt your fingers when you press on it because it's got a nice flat top. It ironically looks like a T. So those are a good thing to have. Another good thing to have, and the ones we have here are also by Knitter's Pride, are called blocking combs. And you get a box of them that contains, I think the box is about 20, I want to say it's $28, $29. You get 12 of this big size with the 8 prongs in the comb, and then you get 12 of the big and 8 of the 4 prong ones. So these are nice. It's like multi-pins into one. So if you've got something you're going to need to block, and I'm going to use these today, where you could use individual pins, these have all the pins in one. And you can press it in. These are incredibly sharp. I poke my fingers with them every single time. You have to be careful. Okay, so
Sharon, that's what I was talking about earlier.
The blocking pins,
Mm-hmm.
the combs, yeah.
Yeah, those
and
are great.
And they come in a box like this. This is an old set. I think the ones we have now are rainbow ones, but they're the same thing. They're very nice to have. And they come all in a foam so they don't fall out. In a foam box. The other thing you might need if you want. You can certainly block something if you're going to soak it. My theory is if I'm going to be putting something in water, I might as well clean it at the same time. So I like to use, and mostly because my dog has probably sat on it or carried it around, because that's my life right now. We carry in the shop. There are several brands of this out on the market. A popular one is called Eucalyptus. The brand we happen to carry in the shop is called Soak. It comes in several scents. It also comes in an unscented. If you've never tried this before, we have some little individual, like one or two time samples that would be happy to, next time you're up this way, call and say, hey, I want to try that soak, and we'll drop a sample in your bag. It's really nice. There's a new scent out called Unleash that is my personal favorite right now. It doesn't really, it just smells clean, which I really like. There's one that's maybe a fig scent, one that's a little brighter, a little more floral. So there's options, and we've got the tester bottles so you can try them out. You do not need much of this. I think I finally finished a bottle of Eucalyptus I bought 10 years ago. It was a big bottle and it has lasted forever because you just don't need very much. So having something like that, like I said, if I'm going to get it wet already, I might as well clean it, is my thought. The other thing that you might want to have, depending on what it is you're blocking, if you make a lot of shawls, we carry, it comes in this nice big long tube. These are blocking wires. And I'm going to show you something that I've used them for. They come in different lengths. There are long lengths in there and some shorter lengths. There are some that are very rigid and some that are a little more flexible. So if you have something with that you might need to curve an angle, you can use that in. Or some of them are very, very rigid. Also, they're rust proof. They're stainless and rust proof, so they're safe to use. And I'm going to show you an example of something I did. I just did a section of it. This was we had a question when I did this class the other day about why would you want to use them? So I got an example ready here. So this, I just did a portion of it. So this was a big triangular shawl that Kim crocheted for us. It's been tried on several times. It's been in the shop. It's been folded up. It's when we had to take the samples down, it kind of got shoved into the bottom of a box. So it needs a little love. So what I did here is I'm going to switch over to the camera for a sec and show you how I use the blocking wires. The nice thing about blocking wires is you don't have to use as many pins. So what I did, so this is the top of the shawl here, which is a straight edge. It's a triangular shawl. So I took the blocking wire and I ran it through in and out of my edge stitches. And I did this dry. This is one that I would probably missed. It doesn't need a lot of love. It just needs a little love. So I don't have to completely soak it. I could do this dry. I ran it through and then I used some of the T-pins up against the wire that cause some tension. So I can pull against this and it keeps the wire nice and straight. But I just needed like 2 or 3 pins across the top. And then on this edge, it has this, almost looks like a little picot here that definitely has lost its thrill. So I took a blocking wire, started at the corner. I would probably put another pin right there. And I ran it through just the tip of each of those points. And I'm going to take these pins out to show you how that works. So I ran it through just those tips of those points. And then what I can do is just pull the wire and it opens up all of this other work as well as this. And then I'm just going to use these pins for the wire to then press back up against. And I only have to use maybe 3 or 4 in each section. And then I would spray it with some water, let it completely dry and unpin it, and it's going to stay in this shape. So you can see just how pulling it out, but it kept this edge nice and straight. If I had just put individual pins, it would probably pull into places, but this keeps this edge nice and straight. So if you are a big shawl knitter, you might really enjoy using the blocking wires. They can really come in handy. And I think particularly if you've got shawls that, I tend to wear my shawls not as shawls, but as scarves. And once I've wound it around my neck a few times, it starts to lose some of its shape, which is okay while it's round around your neck. But then if you want to go back to using it as a shawl, you might want to give it a little reblock. And something like this with the blocking wires, I also like that then you can lean it up against a wall like that, and it's not going to fall apart. You don't have to take up a whole floor space or bed. You can, these foam boards are actually pretty sturdy. And with the wires, it really holds it in place. Okay, so I think I've gone over all of our tools. Oh, and water, you need water. So the shawl that I'm gonna block today, and I'm just gonna block part of it because it's a ginormous shawl. This was the slip extravaganza that a bunch of us did. It was a Stephen West mystery knit along. This is mine. It has definitely been in my dog's mouth. It has definitely been on the floor of my car. It has definitely been underneath like 4 other projects in my bag 100 times, especially when it got put in timeout because I was angry with it. So it's not been handled the most delicately. So it really, and it's also got a lot going on here. There's a lot of different stitches going a lot of different directions. It's got a little bit of open work here that doesn't look regular at this point because maybe my tension was a little off at some points, or just by the nature of how it got knitted and how it hangs. It's got what's called these painting bricks, which are slip stitches. And I know that if I block it and open it up, it's totally going to open up that work and make it look way more beautiful. So I know this definitely needs a lot of love. So this is mine. I've blocked a little bit of it in the last class, one corner of it, but the rest of it, it looks okay, but it's going to look a lot better. So Jack, my son, made one for me, and his has been blocked, and it looks oh so much better. You can see all of his work is opened up. All of the holes are the same shape. All of the honeycombs here at the top, even though I've worn it a few times, are nice and open, and it's staying in the shape that it should be in. The chevrons at the bottom are nice and pointed, and that's all due to blocking. So when we block that, I'm going to show you what it looks like. Blocked real quick. Let me find that. And let me share. So when we blocked it, this was on the floor of my other son's room. It had kind of a unique shape to it. So you can see how we used the floor tiles here and just put them where we needed them. We started here in the center and laid it out, and then figured out how we wanted to pin it out. We used a series of combs and pins. In this one, we did not use lace wires, only because the blocking wires, only because the only place we had a straight edge was right here, and it just didn't seem worth it there. So that took a whole box of pins, and I think 2 boxes of combs because it is ginormous, but very lovely. So I certainly don't have room to do that here, but I'm going to show you how to block part of it. Okay. So when you are, let me switch to camera. Okay. So I'm going to use a little bit of the soap wash. This is just some cool water. Always use, you don't have to use ice cold water. You should be able to put your hand in it and not freeze, but cool water, not hot. And I'm just going to put, for this much water, maybe 3 or 4 drops of this soak. What's nice about the soak is that you don't have to rinse it. It is a no rinse wash. Eucalyptus is the same thing, which is really nice because then you don't have to handle this or agitate it more than you need to. Let me figure out what side I did last time. I did that side. Okay. So I'm going to put this in. In a perfect world, I would put this whole thing in, and when I eventually do block this, I'll put this whole thing in. I'll probably just let it sit for about 15 or 20 minutes. Really want to make sure that all of the fibers are thoroughly saturated. And that's because I know I need to do a lot of blocking on this to really make it look nice. It's not, this isn't your misting project. Okay, so I don't really want to agitate it, but I do want to make sure that this is a super wash wool. So I'm not worried about it shrinking at all. You might see, and another reason to block too, is you might see, I don't know if it'll show up, one of my colors here, and it might be the pink. A little bit of the dye is coming out. And if I was wearing a white shirt, I might want to give it a good soak like this just for the rest of that dye, just to work its way out. Certainly didn't come off on any of my other knitting, but my water does have just a little bit of a pink tinge. And that's not uncommon, especially on really dark dyes and things that are hand dyed. Okay, so I just want to make sure that section is really, really wet. But like I said, in a perfect world, I really would try to avoid agitating it. Only because that can cause your, your fabric to get tangled up. It can cause things to get stretched out more just in the agitating than it already is. Okay, I'm going to move this off camera. And then, because I still want it pretty wet when I'm blocking it, and you don't want to wring it, I'm using an old towel. I'm just picking it up and just gently squeezing some of the water out. So this is really wet. When I'm doing the whole thing, I would lay it out in the towel, roll it up, give it a good squeeze. So it'll keep it nice and wet without being sopping. Okay, that's good for now. If you've got a sweater or a hat or something with superwash, or if it's not something that has a lot of work to be done on it, particularly if it's a superwash wool, or if it's something that says machine wash is fine, you could throw it into a mesh bag and put it on a delicate cycle in your washing machine. I've definitely done that with like hats I've knit for the kids. With, totally fine to do that. I might let it air dry, so it will, depending on what my label says. If you're not sure what the label has said because you've lost your label, I would err on the side of caution and not dry it. I could put it in a gentle cycle and then lay it out to dry. Okay, so with this shawl, I'm going to try to give you kind of a profile, one edge here. It's got this honeycomb section here that the slip stitches here, and it's got reverse stockinette as the black part here that really, I don't know how well the camera shows, but it definitely curls up. So I really want to open, just by doing this, I can see that already looks much more like the way I want it to look. So I'm going to start here. And this, I could use a short blocking wire here to go across this edge. But for time's sake, I'm just going to use the blocking comb. If I really wanted to make sure this was straight, I could either mark or use tape to make a straight edge to go against. But this I'm just going to eyeball. Okay, so you can decide how far apart, depending on your piece, how far apart you need to put those combs. So I would do that all the way across. And then I would work my way down here. So I'm going to move this over so we can see the next section. So then we've got these big loops here that I really want it to be a lot more even. So I start with kind of the hand spreading, the hand shaping before you start putting pins in. I would do this all over. I would get the whole thing laid out. I would really find my shape. If you're doing a sweater, often your pattern will give you finished dimensions that your sweater should be done to. If you have knit a sweater and you've tried it on and you're like, ooh, I really wish it was just a tad looser across the shoulders. You know that going into the blocking that maybe in the shoulder section, I want to be a little more aggressive in laying it out than I do around the waist or around the bottom. So you can know that going in. If it's a pieced sweater, like I talked about earlier, if you know what the finished dimensions, particularly if you're making it for somebody else, that's not something you've tried on, you can measure out. If the sleeve is supposed to be 24 inches, you can lay this out and stretch it until it's 24 inches and pin it into place. Okay, so this I'm going to put one here. And I know I want to open this up. But I would start, I'm going to kind of start from my center and work my way out. And I'm going to have to add another mat over here as we work. And this is, I know this is how we did it on the one that Jack made. Is that we started here, and hey, look, some of my stitches don't always look so even. I also discovered when I was doing this class on Wednesday, just in the blocking like this, I found a couple of drop stitches that I probably never would have seen. So have on hand when you're blocking some stitch markers, so that if you do find something that needs to be fixed, or if you've woven in your ends and they've popped out, you can put a stitch marker on it so that you know at the end when you're all done, you need to go back and fix that. I had found on the other side that one of these, because these are all here, these are all, you can see these are all slip stitches, so you can fit right underneath. One of them had dropped down, and I never saw it when I was knitting, and it didn't drop all the way down, but I was able to catch it, and then I'll go back and repair it afterwards. So these I would pull this out. I'm just going to use the shorter combs here. Kind of following the curve, making these shapes all the same size. So I would continue on all the way around. I'm going to slide over here and add another mat. Okay. And then I could pin each of these pieces open, but what I found is that if I had these pins here, and if I pulled this section here, it automatically opened all of that up. So this might be where I could use a flexible wire. I could run that through here. But what I did instead is I did that, and then I let this just dry open. I didn't feel like I needed to pin each section open. Just in providing the tension between the combs was enough. And I could do it so that it didn't pull anything really out of shape. So it's almost like a jigsaw puzzle. Some people are center out and some people are edges in. This one's a little bit of a mixture of both. We definitely started with an edge and then realized that this shape really curled up a lot more than we anticipated. So this was going to curl. That one's going to curl all the way up there. It was kind of a crescent shape with wings. So we just worked with the shape. And that's where it's nice to have a variety of pins. This section here I felt like was fine, but this section, I'm going to put one a little bit darker underneath so you can see. It has all these little, these were all yarn over holes here. So they look lovely when they're all stretched out. And that goes into the chevron. So we knew we wanted the point to continue on with the chevron. So I took a little more care there in opening up each of those. And again, most of it was just the finger smoothing, but I knew I wanted this to continue on for a nice point. So I'm going to put one pin right there. You know, when you spend, this probably took me 3 months to knit. When you spend that much time knitting something, spending an extra hour to make it look the best it can, we got to look at it all relative. I was so grateful to be done with it, which is one of the reasons I had not blocked it yet. That and Jack gave me the one he made. That was a gift for me. So I've been wearing that. And then I knew this blocking class was coming up, so I saved it. But it's worth it to put the time. You get such a better effect doing that. Let me put another block. Now, obviously not every piece you make is going to be quite this big. Okay. There we go. Okay, so I had pinned this point here. I know some people, I was looking on the Ravelry page for this pattern. Some people chose for this to be more of a wave than a pointy chevron. You can totally make that choice with the blocking. I could make it a little more wavy like that. I want it to be a lot more pointy, and blocking lets me do that. And I don't have to pin anything in between because the tension between these two pins here is keeping my shape. So as I'm working on this, it's already starting to feel a little dry. So by the time I get all of this pinned out, I might have to do a little misting. So have a water bottle handy. It definitely will hold its shape after blocking. And I'm going to do the reverse here. I'm going to block, I'm going to pin this up to help exaggerate the next chevron that way. And if I felt like this needed to be, this is where I discovered a drop stitch on the other side that way. I think I added an extra row in this one, in the pink, or too few rows in here, I can't remember. So it just looked a little odd to me. So I could stretch that colorway out just a little bit and make it look a little more even. Or I could mush it in and make it a smaller stripe. So it gives you the flexibility when I talk about smushing things in. It's very doable, especially with like a garter stitch like this. It's so squishy. And you can really put it together. Does anybody have any questions?
I have a couple questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
If we're knitting a sweater and it doesn't lay flat because, like the front and the back, how to make sure you don't have the back like rumpled up and not know it, and make sure it's like as flat as like when you're pinning the edges?
Yes. Yeah. So when it's a sweater already put together.
Yeah.
So I know exactly what you're talking about. I'm just going to pull this apart and use it as an example real quick. One second here. Okay. So if this were a sweater, and this is the inside of the back, and let's say that this is my front, I would open it up. Was it a cardigan or a pullover?
Pullover.
So what you can do is do as much hand smoothing as you can. Pin it in place. Make sure it's very wet. And then maybe when you feel like it's still a little bit damp, flip it over. Unpin it, flip it over to the other side, spray it again if you need to, and smooth that side out. If it was a cardigan where you could maybe do a little bit of both sides, I would pin this and then flip my sides over and my sleeves out, and then pin it to the front. If it's a whole piece, I would try to make it as smooth as possible, maybe pin across the shoulders, and then put my hands underneath and kind of try to feel that there's no wrinkles or anything in there. But before it completely dries, so maybe halfway through, if it still feels a little damp, unpin it, flip it over, and do any smoothing that you need to, and make sure you get both sides. Does that help?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, when you're all done, if you're like, oh, you missed a spot, or maybe you were a little too aggressive in a pinning and it's left a mark where it shows, that's when maybe you can just give it a little spritz. And then my grandma used to call it finger ironing. She would spit iron anything she gave you was generally covered in her spit. That's just the way she did everything. But you could give it a little spritz, rub it with your hand to kind of smooth out the fibers, or use a little steam and let that one little piece dry. It's like when you put a shirt on a hanger and let it dry and you get the shoulder marks.
Yeah.
If you just spritz those a little bit and shake them out, often that part will just go away. So you don't have to completely reblock the whole thing. That's when you can do misting or a little steaming if it's just one little area that needs to be smoothed out. Any other questions?
Yeah, hi Pam. This is Mel. How you doing?
Hi, good. How are you?
Hi everyone. Question for you. When you block something and it gets wet, let's say it gets soaking wet again, like in the rain or something, will it keep the shape, or do you have to block it again?
It depends on what it is and what it's made out of. If it's like this shawl, every time I like thoroughly wash it, I'm going to have to block it again. That's
Okay.
just, anytime it gets completely soaked, it's going to have to be re-spread out and done. A sweater, it depends on how aggressively you blocked it. If you really had to do a lot of shaping on it to get something to fit, you will probably have to do that every time it gets really, really wet. If it just gets damp, probably not. If you just needed a little smoothing out, then generally just a finger smooth will do it. If you blocked something before you seamed it together, if it's something that you're going to then put together, it won't need nearly as much aggressive blocking after it's sewn together, because those seams are going to hold it in the place that you've put it. Something like the shawl, there's nothing holding it together. into a shape, it's got to be redone every time. So, you know, that'll have to be redone. So it really depends. If it's an all acrylic, you're probably not going to get a whole lot of blocking help out of it anyway. But a nice hand smoothing will probably do the trick.
Okay.